Good day. We are a team headed by Miss Leobrera and together with Mr. John Andrew Evia, Miss Jennifer Garcia, Miss Marian Sedano, and yours truly, Mr. Ren Ragonjan. Let's go back from more than a decade to look closely how devastating Typhoon ONDOY is. Let's see the victims' response to the calamity and disaster, its effects to our physical, emotional, and psychological well-being, and lastly, we will look closely on how the victims raised from the triumphs of the typhoon and how they will be more prepared for the upcoming calamities and disaster that would help them prevent severe damages.
Typhoons, cyclones, or hurricanes are the most violent storms here on Earth. They usually form near the equator over the warm waters of the Atlantic Ocean and the Eastern Pacific Ocean. These giant storms could cause great devastation and damage when they hit land. According to Pag-asa, tropical cyclone is defined as a non-frontal synoptic scale cyclone developing over tropical and subtropical waters at any level and having a definitely organized circulation. In other parts of the world, these are referred to as hurricanes, typhoons, or simply tropical cyclones depending on the region. But whatever you call it, these hurricanes could potentially devastate thousands of people. Basically, tropical cyclones have two requirements. First, warm ocean water. Tropical cyclones acquire their energy from the latent heat of condensation, which makes them exist only over the oceans. Second, wind. Tropical cyclones form only in tropical regions where the ocean is at least 80 degrees Fahrenheit or 26 to 27 degrees Celsius or top 50 meters below the surface. In the Philippines, the development of tropical cyclones are categorized into 4 to 5 stages. Tropical depression, tropical storm, severe tropical storm, typhoons, and super typhoons. Thousands, millions of lives, properties, and livelihoods could be severely affected and lost during the devastation of a typhoon. Squalls, strong winds, tornadoes, rainfall, flooding, and storm surges may occur due to these cyclones. Because of our geographical location, the Philippines is prone to these destructive cyclones, averaging 20 typhoons per year. One of the most unforgettable typhoons in the history of the Philippines is Typhoon Ketsana, or also known as Typhoon ONDOY in the Philippines. It may not be as strong as other super typhoons compared to the Super Typhoon Haiyan, as it has sustained winds of more than 150 meters per hour. It still caused a lot of casualties in the Philippines, specifically a large area of Luzon due to the continuous heavy rains that lasted for days, causing a lot of flooding. Let's look back and know the timeline or chronology of events that transpired last September 24, 2009. Thursday, September 24, 2009. A low-pressure area was found in the east of Luzon which eventually developed into a tropical depression and was named ONDOY, with an international name Ketsana. It was expected to hit the country on Saturday evening or Sunday morning, affecting large areas of Luzon and Visayas. It was already predicted by Pag-asa that the National Capital Region or NCR will experience moderate to heavy rains during the weekend. Friday, September 25, 2009. The tropical depression ONDOY sustained its strength as it moved closer and closer to the west-northwest, heading to the northern and central Luzon. From a tropical depression, it transformed to a tropical storm as it approached the Aurora Isabela area. Flash floods and landslides may occur at this point according to Pag-asa. Pag-asa already raised storm signals. Saturday, September 26, 2009. Typhoon ONDOY increased its speed and accelerated further and moved closer to central Luzon. It landed near the boundary of Quezon and Aurora at 9 o'clock in the morning and traversed through the central Luzon area for 12 long hours, which brought a lot of rain, causing numerous parts of Luzon flooded. It finally traversed and moved off the coast of Zambales. Public storm signals were also raised. The 12 long-hour rain severely affected large areas of Luzon, particularly the National Capital Region. Number 1. Flood. Despite being under Signal Number 1, the National Disasters Coordinating Council stated that the areas of Quezon City, Pasig City, Malabon, Pasay City, Marikina City, Muntinlupa, Rizal have already become flooded. 34.1 centimeters is the amount of rain that fell within just 12 hours from 2 a.m. to 2 p.m., which was almost equal to the monthly average amount of rain, which is 39.2 centimeters, catching Filipinos off guard. It was claimed that this can be considered as the worst flood occurred in most areas of Metro Manila. Number 2. Disruption of services. Utility, transports, airports, water, and electricity services were affected and disrupted for some areas due to the continuous heavy rains. Communication lines were hampered, but TV and radio stations managed to help. Most of the distress calls were from residents that were trapped or have not been rescued. Number 3. Road and transportation. 57 road sections rendered impassable either to light heavy vehicles and for all types of vehicles in regions 2, 3, 4, CAR, and NCR due to erosion, floodwaters, and landslides. Lack of equipment and traffic on the streets have become an issue as the relief and rescue operations were hindered. AFP, PNP, and MMDA used amphibious vehicles and trucks to aid commuters and rescue residents. The Provident Village in Marikina has been considered as one of the hardest hit in the metro. Number 4. Landslides. 3 landslide incidents also occurred. Number 5. Release of water in dam. Officials also decided to release water in Angat Dam, which contributed to the heavy flooding experienced by Pampanga and San Fernando City. It also prompted to open some gates of La Mesa Dam, Ipu Dam, Ambuklao Dam, and Binga Dam, as water levels have already reached their critical status, causing a lot of flooding. President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo now declared a state of calamity all over the Metro Manila. Sunday, September 27, 2009. Typhoon ONDOY already exited the country or the Philippine area of responsibility. According to the final report of NDCC, there were 464 deaths, 529 injured, and 37 missing. A total of 993,227 families, 4,901,234 persons were in 2,018 barangays, 172 municipalities, 16 cities of 26 provinces by Tropical Storm ONDOY. The total number of evacuated inside 244 evacuation centers were 15,798 families or 70,124 persons. The estimated cost of damage to infrastructure in agriculture amounted to 11 billion, infrastructure for 4.2 billion to include school buildings and health facilities in agriculture. A total of 1,382 school buildings were also damaged. Despite the adversities and obstacles faced by many Filipinos, the people and the government responded with measures during and after the disaster. On September 26, 2009, the NCC OPSEN received distress calls from residents pleading for rescue from the various areas of Metro Manila. These were relayed to NCRCOM and AFP. NDCC chairman issued subordinates to take necessary measures such as the suspension of classes, usage of trucks to conduct emergency rescue operations, and immediate evacuation of people who called for help. On September 27, 2009, several incident command posts were also established in Quezon City and Pasig City. The PAF already conducted an aerial survey to evaluate and assess the affected areas. On September 28, 2009, a rapid damage assessment was done by NDCC UNIASC CT. The support and assistance were given to the affected people. The NDCC released rice assistance worth 43.6 million and 24,650 sacks of rice were distributed to regions 3, 4A, 4B, 10, and NCR. Relief goods in the form of food and non-food items was also provided by DSWD. PAGCOR, IRCR, Upland Sagipbayan, and NFA Rolling Stone also released and provided relief packs for the devastated families. Programs for the early recovery of the affected were also established to support and aid Filipinos. Early recovery programs on October 26, 2009, an early recovery cluster meeting was conducted where an immediate provision of cash food for work was pleaded to help non-earners to augment relief and life savings activities such as disposal and retrieval of debris. Cash or Food for Work is a project and a short intervention to provide temporary employment to the affected families by participating in or undertaking early recovery such as clean of waste and debris. 1,332 families were also transferred and relocated to the following relocation sites: Balik Probinsya Program, financial assistance, shelter settlement and livelihood assistance, wash, health, nutrition, and psychosocial services were also given to the devastated families. Lastly, the DOH deployed teams, which primarily concerns in providing medical, psychosocial, public health, water sanitation, hygiene, and nutrition.
On September 26, 2009, Tropical Storm Ondoy, international code name Ketsana, made landfall on Luzon Island. With maximum winds of 85 kilometers per hour and gusts up to 120 kilometers per hour, thousands of families were forced to seek safety in evacuation shelters after the rain flooded villages and roads, sometimes completely engulfing whole houses. Regions 1 through 5, the Cordillera Administrative Region, and the National Capital Region, which includes Metro Manila, are all affected. That year, Ondoy was responsible for a leptospirosis outbreak. Only a few weeks after Ondoy caused flooding in Metro Manila, Calabarzon, and Central Luzon, the Department of Health reported 383 cases of leptospirosis in 9 Metro Manila hospitals. Surprisingly, this number accounts for half of all leptospirosis cases reported in 2009. A team of international experts from Australia, France, the Netherlands, and Singapore was even enlisted to assist the DOH in reacting to the leptospirosis outbreak. In addition, the following issue areas and possible action areas were identified as a result of the flood's health impact of the disaster. Increased risk of measles, diarrheal infections, waterborne diseases, and vector-borne diseases outbreaks. Inadequate care for pregnant and breastfeeding women among those who have been relocated. Insufficient family planning supplies for long-term users. Affected areas lack disease surveillance and referral services. In most impacted locations, there is a lack of potable water. Evacuation facilities like limited medical care or mobile and outreach work is lacking. Issues with sanitation in evacuation camps and impacted communities. Existing medical supplies are unsure how long they last. And the damage to health facilities resulting in health service disruption in the majority of impacted barangays. And due to this, as of September 30, 2009, it was projected that over the next few weeks, illness-related deaths will rise. The typhoon wrecked many millions of people's lives, damaging livelihood, houses, and crops, and shocking TV news viewers with images of thousands of people wading through floodwaters in central Manila. Those consequences can still be felt. Thousands of the poorest survivors in the Philippines are still living in tents, a year after being evacuated from their former small houses on plots of land where they face an uncertain future as authorities try to negotiate land rights that would offer them a permanent home.
According to psychologists, events like disaster and tragedies tax the human mind and spirit that result in severe mental and emotional breakdowns. Survivors experiencing losing a loved one, sources of livelihood such as businesses and farmlands affect them mentally and emotionally. These emotional effects may be short-lived and visible, but for some, they may be long-lasting and hidden, leading to trauma. Reports state that the most common reactions experienced by the individuals who survived the Typhoon Ondoy are: first, shock due to the suddenness of the disaster, coupled with the unpreparedness and feeling bewildered. Second, anger, which is directed either towards the disaster itself, God, others, or themselves. Third, depression due to the loss of properties and loved ones. And lastly, survival guilt or wondering why they survived while others did not. The Community and Family Services International Emergency Response Team have reported that the immediate impact of Typhoon Ondoy to individuals and families through high levels of distress, anxiety, frustration, helplessness, and insecurity. Signs of depression were observable in some internally displaced persons, as well as feelings of their dignity being threatened since they have become mere recipients of relief goods. Parents are reported to appear the most anxious in their situations, since they were mostly concerned about providing for their family's basic needs. Additionally, parents also displayed concerns over their children's welfare in terms of their health and education, which increases their overall anxiety. Consequently, the children also expresses their concerns regarding their education, more specifically on how they can go back to their school when their books, school supplies, and uniforms are all gone. In contrast, some children, despite their situation, are shown to cope fairly well by playing inside the evacuation centers and socializing with other people. The CFSI Emergency Response Team have summarized the trauma and other disaster-induced reactions observed in evacuation centers during the Typhoon Undoy. The survivors are reported to be in a state of shock and seem unable to acknowledge what has occurred, are angry and aggressive and seem to need to blame someone, are sad and teary. Many survivors are turning to religion or spirituality to accept what has happened to them. Feelings of helplessness and hopelessness are also evident, while on the other hand, some survivors, particularly children, are showing resilience through play and laughter. And lastly, some survivors appear to have made the decision to move forward with their lives and are already trying to forget the experience.
Despite the chaos and devastation produced by Typhoon Undoy, Filipinos have shown a remarkable ability to recover rapidly from shock and hardship, which may be due to our resiliency. In the aftermath of a disaster, community resilience acts as a buffer, reducing the detrimental impact of such disasters and aiding recovery and resumption of normal. Simply put, people's resilience in the face of hardship is based on positive attributes. Based on studies, the positive characteristics of pakikibagay sa kalikasan, malasakit, bayanihan, tiwala, pag-asa, pagtitiis, pagkamasayahin at palabiro, lakas ng loob at tapang sa gitna ng takot, pagkamaparaan, pasasalamat, and pananalig sa Diyos proved to be crucial in assisting the community in surviving and recovering from the devastation caused by Typhoon Undoy. To avoid post-traumatic stress, the Philippine National Red Cross Social Services Department provided psychosocial treatment to victims of Typhoon Undoy in Metro Manila. It was held at H. Bautista Elementary School and Malanday Elementary. They assisted victims with their concerns and questions, as well as provided medical support and first aid if necessary. Used PNRC training services to help find displaced and missing people as a result of the typhoon. PNRC social workers received 82 tracing requests and responded to them. Critical Incident Stress Disorder or CISM was created to assist people in dealing with their trauma one episode at a time by allowing them to discuss the occurrence at the time it occurred. And a total of 606 victims were treated for CISM. And lastly, guidance and counseling were provided to 161 typhoon victims in distress as well as medical help or first aid to 155 people. Mental processes are important components of an individual's strategy to deal with stressful situations. When the Typhoon Undoy struck the Philippines last 2009, it caused several psychological disturbances amongst many individuals. Following the theory of psychological stress and coping by Lazarus and Folkman, there are two types of coping strategies people use when dealing with situations. Emotion-focused coping, wherein people tend to control their own emotional response, such as suppressing emotions, distracting themselves, etc. And problem-focused coping, where individuals focus their attention on targeting or handling the problem or the stressor itself. Based on these two coping strategies, we can see that the survivors of Typhoon Undoy employed these two. First, emotion-focused coping, where survivors are seen to be getting angry, aggressive, and seem to need to blame someone, sad and teary, and turning to religion or spirituality to cope or accept what has happened to them. Problem-focused coping, on the other hand, can still be seen as having malasakit, such as making it possible for them to be able to provide extra effort for one another. And pakikipagbayanihan, which can be seen as there being no longer any distinction between what once was owned or the other, and helping any member of the community is a top priority among the community. This is particularly relevant given that these Filipino concepts are critical components in Filipinos' ability to manage the hazards individuals encounter on a regular basis, and for whom hazard is a common occurrence.
Globally, economic costs of natural disaster are estimated to be large and growing. Here in the Philippines, the Center for Research in the Epidemiology of Disasters and International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies estimated that 2.7 million people have been directly affected and 94 million indirectly affected by natural disasters from 1992 to 2011. After the Typhoon Undoy happened, authorities have mentioned that its effects will likely reduce the Philippine economic growth. The flood brought by Undoy has caused heavy damages to the agriculture and economy of several towns. Although health is the major concerns in such situations, one such important effect is that on the economy.
The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas have mentioned the damages caused by Typhoon Undoy in their report on regional economic development during the first and second semester of 2009 that the agriculture sector production of palay in 2009 declined relative to 2008's level as tropical storms Undoy and Pepeng adversely affected palay production in the fourth quarter of 2009. Moreover, the negative effects effects of Typhoon Ondoy and Pepeng persist in the agricultural sector of Cagayan Valley due to the heavy damages in facilities such as farm-to-market roads and irrigation systems, among others. Heavy rains and flash floods brought by the tropical storms Ondoy and Pepeng were listed among the reasons for the double-digit decline of palay production, which adversely affected farms in the region. Economists and analysts typically examine damage to agriculture, which is a crucial contributor to the country's GDP growth rate, in order to measure the impact of typhoon on the economy in general. The National Economic Development Authority mentioned that based on the estimate of 3.17 billion pesos damage of Ondoy on agriculture, it is said that the GDP growth rate assumption for 2009 was reduced to 0.7 to 1.7%. Below is the NDCC's final report on the total damage caused of Typhoon Ondoy.
When the Philippines was hit by the tropical storm Ketsana, locally known as Ondoy, on the 24th of September 2009, it took hundreds of lives and marked an intense casualties in our country. This catastrophe not just led to a disruption of infrastructures, houses, schools, and buildings, but it also brought temporary dysfunction to the basic systems and services such as transportation, electricity, agriculture, and utility.
Through the use of social media, the victims of Typhoon Ondoy demonstrated bayanihan by posting the incidents of their own or even the situation of their neighbors. The local government units, such as the barangays of the affected areas, took necessary measures, conducted emergency rescue operations, and assistance for those who are seeking help.
Meteorological services such as Pag-asa, the government, public figures, various departments, and volunteers have offered their services and extended their help to the affected areas. Donations such as money, rice, water, and clothing were given to the victims of the typhoon. Several families were also offered relocation sites, which were supported by the different departments. Evidently, the television, radio, social media posts, and news gave much urgent attention to the plight of the Filipinos during this time. There were several fundraising initiatives, rescue operations, and many people volunteered to help their kababayans.
After the impact brought by the Typhoon Ondoy, Loren Legarda, who was a senator during that time, insisted on an order stating that there should be a massive cleaning of esteros and all waterways, assuming that the vulnerability to flooding will decrease. The solid waste management law was also subjected to implementation. She said that the public must be educated on simple double actions such as proper waste disposal and waste segregation. After discussing the effects of the Typhoon Ondoy to the Filipinos, we shall now discuss what can be done better. First is, we must improve the disaster risk assessment. Considering the position of the town, being a valley with a river running through it, Marikina City is very known for being a flood-prone town, especially barangays Tumana, Malanday, Santo Niño, Tanyong, Santa Elena, De La Pena, San Roque, and Kalumpang that are residing beside the Marikina River. Hence, these said barangays and the village of Provident must not be a residing place, for it is a floodplain.
Ang Provident Village is a floodplain. Ibig sabihin ng floodplain, dapat ay wala ditong kabahayan na naitayo o kaya anumang struktura. Dahil pag umapaw ang tubig sa ilog, ito yung pansamantalang titigilan ng tubig hanggang umagos na ito pabalik sa daluyan.
The second is to improve the disaster risk reduction plan. The city of Marikina, together with other government agencies, were in talks on how they could avoid massive flooding prior to the calamity. But still, the city of Marikina was not ready for the magnitude of Typhoon Ondoy. Additionally, there were no specific plans that have been executed before the actual impact of the typhoon. Signal level warnings were not sufficient to tell the magnitude of this typhoon, resulting in flood-prone areas to be submerged by flood waters. Furthermore, the local government of Marikina didn't have sufficient resources for evacuating and rescuing people. If the disaster risk reduction plan was readily made with proper execution and enough resources to be utilized, then the gravity of Typhoon Ondoy is assumed to be lessened. Third is proper waste management. Typhoon Ondoy's magnitude could be lessened if people invested in proper waste management. People from Metro Manila use plastics for their everyday lives, and yet they don't have the proper waste management, in which this plastic trash has been found to be one of the major causes of blocked drainage and floodways. If only people have the proper waste management and recycling programs, then the massive flood from the Typhoon Ondoy could be lessened.
Thus, it can be better if the flood-prone areas like the Marikina City, specifically the Provident Village, conducted a better regular disaster risk assessment in order to anticipate the magnitude of the typhoon.
Looking upon the damages brought by Typhoon Ondoy from the last decade, it is surely hard to move on. But with Filipinos being naturally resilient, Typhoon Ondoy are now lessons from tomorrow. And we think that we can move forward through of these techniques such as improving emotional response of people, especially vulnerable group, capacity development, and by educating people, especially vulnerable groups, in which these would not just help them move forward but also prepare them from the other calamities.
In order to move forward from the devastating experience brought by the Typhoon Ondoy, vulnerable groups must improve their emotional response to the disaster. Following the said emotion-focused and problem-focused response, then people can improve their emotional response by controlling their perspective and responses, like suppressing emotions and distracting themselves with productive things they need to do in order to cope up with the damages. These emotion and problem-focused responses of the people can be a good strategy in moving forward because they can be realistic about how they handle emotions and how they handle the problems in front of them. By doing so, vulnerable groups can avoid the severe effects of the psychological stressors brought by the calamities and disasters. Although most of the cities in Metro Manila have the capacity to help people during Typhoon Ondoy, it is evidently seen that it is not enough to the magnitude of the said typhoon. Affected residents and the people around the country can move forward from this devastating event by making proactive actions that could be helpful in times of calamities and disasters. First, we can move forward by increasing the rescue resources of the city governments, just like the Marikina City, who is evidently learned from the Typhoon Ondoy, wherein they are now having lots of tents that can be used in evacuation sites and also boats that can be used to access flooded areas in some places. Second, we can move forward by increasing calamity funds since we are aware that the country of the Philippines is prone for typhoons, so investing for such calamities is a good choice in order to reduce damages that the typhoons can bring. Lastly, moving forward includes preparation for future disasters and calamities. Hence, in order to move forward, local government units must invest in training rescue personnel that can be helpful in emergency situations. Since it is inevitable for the people living in the flood-prone areas to leave their homes and livelihood around, it is better to educate them, especially the vulnerable residents, on what to do in case the calamities and disaster are around the corner. People from vulnerable areas must be informed when is the right time to go to the evacuation site, as well as where the evacuation site is located. Next, vulnerable residents must always prepare essential things in a single bag in which they can carry as fast as possible in case a disaster happens. Lastly, vulnerable residents can move forward to their lives by always being alert. Since these groups are the most vulnerable when calamities happen, then they must be alert on what to do and where to go without panicking.
A disaster can really be devastating for the victims, but it leaves tons of lessons that people would bring in the future. After the Typhoon Ondoy, there are positive outcomes that are happening in Metro Manila, especially in the Marikina City, where it is the most affected city in the metro. After Typhoon Ondoy, the first positive outcome is that there is a law established for disaster risk reduction and management. Next is the widening of Marikina River, and lastly is the monitoring and alarm system of the Marikina River.
Right after Ondoy, RA 10121, known as the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act of 2010, is established, in which it is an act of strengthening the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management System, providing for the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Framework and institutionalizing the National Disaster Reduction and Management Plan and appropriate funds therefore and for other purposes. Typhoon Ondoy is really an eye-opener to the whole city of Marikina and even in the metropolitan area. And the positive outcome of this disaster and calamity is that the effort of reducing the possibility of the massive community flooding. The dredging of Marikina River has the goal of widening and deepening the Marikina River in order for the flood waters to flow again in the right velocity, in which it can help to avoid the massive floods just like the Typhoon Ondoy brought. The DRRM Office of Marikina installed 2 water level monitoring equipment along the Marikina River, in which these are river monitoring sensors around the critical areas of Marikina from the DOST that can accurately measure and determine the flood waters in real time, that can also predict how fast the water rise up. So when the typhoons come and the
when the river's water level rises, the DRRM in Marikina uses a siren to alert the whole city about the river's situation.
Indeed, experience is the best teacher. Up to this time, survivors can still vividly express how they escaped their windows, survived several days without food and water, and how they eagerly screamed at the top of their lungs to seek help during a life and death situation. We must reflect and never underestimate our vulnerabilities and the impacts of extreme weather events or natural calamities such as the Typhoon Ondoy. We should not let negligence, poor vision, unpreparedness, and lack of response be the cause of losing our loved ones.